use it, or if not necessarily lose it, at the very least watch it fall into decay. That's going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. Alright, so I'm still in Bali. You can probably tell I'm very hot and sweaty, but I managed to get out of Ubud. I'm just taking a little trip down to Sanur to catch up with an old friend and colleague, and on the way I thought I'd stop by somewhere interesting, mainly out of some nostalgia, because I visited this place when I was here in Bali, not immediately before all of the border closures and lockdowns and things like that a few years ago, and I thought, I'll swing by on my way past. And so I'm going to take you on a little bit of a walk around this place. As I do this, some of the time the camera will face towards me, so you can see what, walking around here, and then a lot of the time I'll put shots facing the other way so you can get an idea of what it looks like walking around this interesting old place. So it's an abandoned theme park. It's called Bali Festival Theme Park, or Bali Festival Park, something like that. And it was built, I don't remember when, some time ago, and never actually used, never actually opened. Something happened and then they just left it, and it's become very run down. And I do find it quite interesting. There's something appealing to me to look around places like this. I think just seeing the state of decay, and maybe a certain amount of thinking like, well, I wonder what that was like when it was first built. Some of the parts wondering, well, what was this even intended for? And then seeing the way that nature reclaims things and breaks things down bit by bit, gradually. I think somewhere like this in Bali, where it's quite hot and very humid, things break down a bit faster maybe than in other parts of the world. I've visited other places like this at different times. If you followed the vlog for a while, one place you might recall, this is quite a few years ago, is in Georgia. That's Georgia on the border between Europe and Asia. I went around and looked at a bunch of old sanatoriums, health resorts, health spas that were used in the Soviet era. And people would go there and they would bathe in spring water and all that sort of thing. But again, since the Soviet era, unused, and so therefore broken down and decayed. So anyway, how does this tie in with Qigong possibly? I mean, there is this principle, I'm sure you've heard it, as a saying, use it or lose it, right? And that's what I referred to at the very start of this video. And it's true, things benefit from being used, having life, having movement. And so actually, out of interest, one of the things, if you're following the vlog, you'll know this already. If not, I'll let you know. One of the main things I'm doing here in Bali is I'm looking for venues to possibly host some retreats or trainings at some point in the future. And I was out looking at a venue just a couple of days ago and looking around, and I do like this particular venue. I think it's a good candidate possibly for some retreats in the future. Overall, it's very nice. But it hasn't been used much since, over the last few years. There was obviously interrupted by COVID, and then also hasn't been so busy last year, but the guy who was showing me around, he said, look, they are starting to get busier. They're having more groups come through now. And I was interested looking at the building and looking at the buildings and the condition that they were in. Because again, overall it's very, very nice. But the buildings are showing signs of age, some signs of deterioration. Not in a way that would make it not nice to use them, but clearly some deterioration there. And I asked him when they were built, and he said 2019. So that's just 5 years ago. In fact, I think that might have been when they started being built. I think it was actually finished maybe a couple of years later. So, you know, maximum 5 years old, yeah, and showing a lot more deterioration than you'd expect in other parts of the world often. Again, I think a lot of that is down to the heat and the humidity. But something else as well, particularly, is that they haven't been being used. While there's no groups coming through this particular venue, they do basic maintenance, and then they'll come and tidy things up properly before a group comes through. But it's different from having daily usages, people in there, you know, all day, every day, people coming and going, being cleaned, being used, and so on. And because certainly the buildings around here that I do see being used are in much better condition than that, you know, for their age. They don't deteriorate in quite the same way. So this applies to lots and lots of things, and it applies to us and our bodies, and even our energy in a certain respect as well. You know, sometimes there might be aspects of how we use our bodies, well, that we don't use for a period of time, and over a period of time they stop working the way they once did. I think we can all maybe remember being more flexible when we were younger, or maybe being able to jump more easily, or things like that. And a lot of the reason, there's multiple reasons, but a lot of the reason why we start to lose those abilities is simply because we're not using them. We're not using our full range of motion, and we're not moving in a diverse range of ways, and so our body just loses those capabilities, or at least they decline, they degrade. And one good thing about Qigong in relationship to some of these things, just on a physical level, is within many Qigong practices, they get our bodies moving in a whole range of ways which are very healthy for us, that we maybe wouldn't normally in our day-to-day normal, you know, modern life. And by doing that, they keep our tissues healthy. They bring energy back into the tissues. This is a really key thing. It's, you know, in Qigong we work with energy flow, and movement brings energy flow. And so that it's like, you know, with these building stuff, it's like having people go through them every day. When we move our body, it brings energy through it, and therefore we maintain it better, and we're able to have health in those tissues. And so Qigong, you know, this is part of the reason why in some Qigong practices, moving Qigong of course, because, you know, there's Qigong that is done standing still, sitting still, and so on. But moving Qigong, this is why often they use movements that are a bit unusual for our normal habits, and it's because it's to open up and get the energy flowing through different parts of our body that, you know, otherwise the energy might get blocked, might get stagnant, leading to decay, leading to deterioration. Sometimes when something major has happened, there can be a tendency to shut that off, to avoid it. And you could compare this. I don't know what it was that happened with this theme park, but there's talk of all sorts of superstition and things like that. But, you know, something clearly happened that stopped it from being used. And, you know, sometimes some things in our lives can happen that stop us from using different parts of our body or different aspects of our energy, of our personality. We're multi-dimensional beings. And it could be that we have a physical injury, and therefore, you know, then we, you know, avoid using that part of our body. It could be we have a bad or unpleasant experience interacting with someone, and so then we try to avoid that type of interaction, or whatever it might be. And then, well, that doesn't help things, right? You know, we do that to avoid pain, to avoid discomfort, but then whatever that is, that area of our body, that aspect of our personality, doesn't get use, and so it doesn't improve. It doesn't get fresh energy flow through it that would allow it to become healthy and heal. And so it's really important sometimes when we have these issues, and often we're consciously aware of these issues, things we're uncomfortable with, things that we're not enjoying in our life, things where we recognize we're limited, to understand that in order to make progress in those areas, we need to get in and move what hasn't moved for a period of time. We need to get in and apply what we haven't applied, and that might be uncomfortable to begin with. But the only way that we improve is by actually bringing that fresh energy in, and getting past, getting through that discomfort. Now that doesn't mean we need to force anything or anything like that, but we don't improve things by just avoiding them. We need to actually address them, and ideally in a gentle way, get things flowing, get things moving again. All right, moving on from this, I thought there's an interesting maybe little commentary here as well about Qigong itself in general, because for quite a long period of time there's both some things that have disrupted, but then there's also been a tendency to hide Qigong practices. There was a tendency for a long period of time for people to keep their Qigong practices all to themselves. It's one of the big traditions historically in Qigong, that people were very secretive and they hoarded it to themselves. They didn't want anyone else to know all the details of their practice. And then in addition to that, there were some things which made it difficult for people to practice, some political persecution and things like that also disrupted things. And because of this, a lot of different aspects of Qigong in general have, you could say, fallen into a bit of a state of not being used, and therefore into a state of disrepair. There's so much amazing potential within Qigong, so much beauty, so many diverse applications, and it's not really living up to it right now. And for a long time it was just suppressed and kind of almost disappeared in a way. Of course, there's pockets of people who are still using their Qigong and applying it well, and that's great. And that's part of what is leading to what's happening now, which is a bit of a resurgence of Qigong in a way, where people are starting to come in and use those principles, use those practices again, and find the beauty and discover the benefits. And I found it interesting visiting this theme park again this time, because I mentioned I did visit it immediately prior to the pandemic. There's a few things that are different here. For one thing, when I visited immediately before the pandemic, I came with one other person, and it was just the two of us here, no one else walking around. Now, there's not a lot of people, but there's a few other people walking around having a good explore, which is cool. And something much more significant, as I came in through the front gates, a guy said, "Oh, they're getting ready for a music festival, for a big party for some students at the moment," which is really cool. And you can see they're setting up. They've set up a big stage, and then they've set up a pavilion for all the sound gear and the lighting and the controllers, people who are going to mix the audio. They've set all that stuff up, or they're in the process of setting it up. They've got chairs, which life is coming back into the place. My understanding is that a few years ago, because of different superstitions, something like that wouldn't have happened. People wouldn't have organized an event here. They would have just avoided it. But now things are starting to happen again. The place is starting to be rediscovered. Maybe not in the exact same form, or certainly not in the exact same form of earlier, as a theme park, but as a place for entertainment, as a place for people to go and enjoy themselves. I think that's really cool. And so, maybe a little parallel with what's going on with Qigong globally at the moment, that Qigong is being rediscovered, the beauty is being rediscovered from a state of, I'd say frankly, a state of a bit of disrepair. So much is still not even understood about Qigong and how it works, and the nature of some practices. And you can compare that maybe to some of these buildings where you look at them and it's like, I know it was something, but I can't tell what exactly they thought they were going to use this for, because it's so run down. but it is being rediscovered, and I think that's really, really cool. And there is so much potential, so much for beautiful things to arise, to come back out of, well, again, even in a state of decay, fascinating to explore. And even practices which people have done without knowing what they're for, without really understanding, and maybe parts of it have been lost, are still fascinating, but so much more valuable to truly bring them to life again. Anyway, just some musings as I go for a wander today. Maybe it's been interesting for you, hopefully. And yeah, if so, please like, comment, subscribe, share, all those good things. I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.